Last time, this time on True Fear, I'm sick. Bear with me. Last time on True Fear, I talked about the ghost hand in our photo. Seriously, look right there, it's actually there. So if you haven't seen that episode and want to hear more about that, pop on over there. But on today's episode, it's Independence Day here in America, the land of the Americans. And if you're part of the 32.1% of my audience that is not from the USA, then perhaps you've heard of the 1996 blockbuster, starring Will Smith. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you give that one a watch, but I can't say the same for the sequel that came out 20 years later. In fact, the only entertaining part of that movie-going experience was what went down in the theater that evening. So, being fans of the original, Claude Gnome and I made plans to go see this new Independence Day movie. It wasn't like right when the movie came out or anything, and I think we saw it late on a weekday, so there were some people in the theater, but it wasn't packed. There was also some remodeling going on in that theater at the time, so I think that helped keep the crowds down a bit. And at this particular cinema, they have big recliners, so it's not like super high capacity anyways. We were in the second row from the back, basically in the middle of the screen. There were some couples scattered around in front of us, a family who was in our row all the way to the left, one guy in the row behind us all the way in the right corner, and a group of people who were also in the back row over in the left corner. The movie starts, and about 5 or 10 minutes in, the man sitting by himself in the back right starts talking on the phone. I don't remember what he was talking about, but the only reason I didn't say something right away was that there wasn't really interesting going on in the movie. This guy was slightly more entertaining than what was happening on screen. I also figured that he'd be off the phone soon before we got into any of the worthwhile scenes, so I just kind of tuned it out for a little while. Let's just say that I'm glad that I did. A couple minutes later, the guy is still blabbering, and that's when I've decided enough is enough. I'm gonna get up, call this guy out, and tell him, hey, shut up, we're trying to watch the movie. Then, literally, as I go to confront this guy, I hear someone from across the theater yell out at him. The first thing the phone guy does is make his way across the row over to the people who yelled at him. My first impression was that they actually knew each other, like they were supposed to meet here or something, and the phone guy was just going over to say hi. Then, even when they started yelling at each other, I was just thinking that it was the type of thing where buddies are just like giving each other a hard time. Jeez. This sickness is giving me a hard time. What happened next was what started to make me worried. First, the yelling escalates, and the guys start pushing each other around. Then the woman from the family in front of them gets up and starts hollering at them, telling them, knock it off, stop it right now. This causes the group that was fighting in the back to start getting into it with her and her husband. At this point, the commotion is completely drowning out the movie. I think we probably would have fared fine in a brawl, but the scary part was when I turned and saw one of the couples in front of us quickly get up and speed out of the theater, because this made me think that they had some reason to be afraid, despite being pretty far away from where the fight was taking place. The first thing that came into my head is that they were trying to escape because someone up there had a gun. And after what took place in Colorado in 2012, and the increasing amount of shootings taking place in this country since that incident, the idea of something happening here was actually pretty scary. These people seemed like pretty shady characters as well, and if someone is dumb enough to start a fight in a movie theater, who knows if they're actually stupid enough to carry a weapon into one. And I think what started to make that possibility scary as the situation continued to escalate is the way they were acting, which was clearly outside of the social normal, and the way they were dressed, which was, without a more eloquent way of explaining, they were looking pretty thug. And I'm not saying that everyone who follows those fashion trends is a dangerous criminal or anything. I think that makes about as much sense as when people see me wearing black and assume that means that I'm sad or something. But in the end, it's just something that contributed to us feeling nervous about the situation. And Claude Gnome would later tell me that he felt the same way about it. However, we paid like $14 to get into that movie, and that's before you even factor in the cost of parking. So we were gonna stick that one out no matter how bad the movie was, no matter how obnoxious the other audience members were, no matter how beaten and bruised we were at risk of becoming by entering this brawl, and no matter how likely it was that we would be shot and killed before this movie let out. So we stood our ground. So eventually the lady who was yelling at them to stop, and hold on, can we just pause for a second? Why is it that whenever you see videos of a fight or some kind of commotion in general, there's always some annoying lady yelling out about how wrong this is, how disgusted she is, how we all just need to stop and think of the children? It just seems that that lady is always there. All right, Time in. So the lady takes her family and storms out the cinema. I'm not sure if she threatened to report them to the management or something, as I couldn't really make out all that was being said, but this is kind of what triggered them to start moving the fight towards the exits, and they ended up duking it out down the aisle until eventually one of them made a run across the width of the theater and out of our auditorium. So that was kind of a relief, but at the same time, it was the end of that evening's entertainment, or so we thought. You would probably expect that after an incident like that, the hoodlums would book it and get out of there before the police showed up. I'm not sure exactly how long had passed before the three who started the confrontation came marching back into the theater. Not long after that, the original phone guy comes in and stands at the exit, just staring into the auditorium. And that's where I was thinking, this is it. This is where he comes back with his .48 caliber and shoots us all down. He even had his hand in his pocket, and of course he was blocking the only exits. So then he comes after the people who he had gotten into it with before, and they start going at it some more. I don't really have any idea, like, what made this fight so personal that they still had beef after things had pretty much already cooled down. Eventually, after a few more people had fled the room, they chased the guy out of there again and followed him out into the lobby. I wish I could have seen what happened out there, but also I didn't want to make it obvious that I was watching and risk getting myself involved in it. So we were left with just a couple of other moviegoers by the time this had all died down. We can only assume that someone who had left had reported the incident at some point. What was surprising to me is that nobody ever came back to the theater except for one employee who came with a flashlight and collected something that was left behind. The three goons who had called the guy out on his phone had left their jackets, so I guess the employee had to come collect them before they left or got kicked out or whatever. Nobody was questioned about the incident, and as far as I know, the police never showed up. We were not offered a refund, but I'm not sure if the same held true for the people who left and possibly complained. I was most surprised that the one family who was sitting down the row from us never returned, because it seemed like they would just go get the management and come back. They also left all of their snacks and stuff behind, some of which were unopened. It made me think that something might have happened to one of them out there, or they honestly were just really scared and fled the entire place and never looked back. We enjoyed their unopened snacks at the end as a consolation prize for having sat through that movie, but we never found out the whole story of exactly what happened that made the situation so violent. The scariest thing to me, looking back on it, is it easily could have been me who ended up in the fight, had those other people not spoken before I did. The other thing that was kind of haunting was not knowing what took place outside the auditorium, or why none of those other people ever returned. Surprisingly enough, this wasn't the only scary occurrence that I've ever experienced inside of a cinema. So join me next time on True Fear when I tell the story of what happened when I went to go Stephen King's most underappreciated movie, 1408. And additionally, I also posted a video a couple days ago, and I don't think it hit the sub boxes. It's a video about my theories about the movie It Comes at Night. Kind of funny that I did this video about a disease movie, and now I'm super sick. So I'm going to link that one to you guys in addition to the True Fear playlist. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. Punch that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive. Which for me right now, it's looking kinda grim.